Hello YouTube and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Elden Ring and we're going to be doing a fan requested thing. Quite a few people have asked for this, so we're going to be doing some build guides just for some overpowered builds that you can hopefully get to at a pretty reasonable time in the game. So we're going to be doing the 4 overpowered builds that I've chosen to highlight here. And the reason I chose these builds is because, well, they're pretty versatile and they don't require a tremendous amount of skill to use them very effectively, I guess I should say. Yeah, that's why I chose these. So we're just going to start off with the first one, which is the Darth Maul Twin Blade build. So you've probably seen something similar to this online. This isn't going to be exactly the same as them, but it's going to be pretty similar to most Darth Maul builds. So you can see what we're wielding here. We've got ourselves a Sacred Seal on the left hand and a Twin Blade in the right, and then we've got the Bloodflame blade locked and loaded as our incantation. As far as equipment on this one, I'm just going to show you, obviously don't need 2 Twin Blades, I'm just going to show you the 2 that work for this, and one of them I've added a Ashes of War upgrade to that I think is very useful, but it has its drawbacks. And then there's just the standard Twin Blade. Then we have a Finger Seal, because like I said, you need a Sacred Seal. And then for your armor, you're going to want to either have heavy or medium armor, so I went with one that gives me a medium load just because it keeps my stamina up a little bit higher so I don't drain as fast that way, and this one does require a decent amount of mobility. So you can see here I've got the Drake Knight armor. Now obviously this is a late game armor that you get from the Crumbling Fire Missoula, so maybe not everybody has this, but really most armor sets are going to work real good for this as long as they provide enough protection, because this set isn't perfect. You're not going to never take damage when you're using this set, so you want to make sure you've got armor that protects you decently well, and I like to make sure that you also stick with some mobility, so that's why I went with the Drake Knight set. But most of your standard Knight sets from like random drops, you know, from the guards or knights that you kill around the map, those would also work. A lot of the starting armors would work. It really depends on your own personal kind of tastes with it. Then for talismans, I went with the Twin Blade Talisman, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, so that's just going to give us a big boost to our physical damage negation. Then we're going to use the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and so that one, the effect is that blood loss in the vicinity increases your attack power, and since the attacks we're doing are going to be causing blood damage, you're always going to have that increase to your attack power, and I find that to be decently useful, especially against larger enemies. And then our last talisman that I chose to use is the Taker's Cameo, and that one restores HP upon defeating enemies. This one is going to be a lot more useful against mob type enemies than bosses, because obviously, if you're fighting a boss, there's usually not that many extra enemies that you're killing. Sometimes there are, and then it's useful. In the Renala fight, for example. But otherwise, it's really only going to be useful when you defeat an enemy, because then you get a big chunk of your hit points back, which I find quite useful. So that's the gear setup for this build. If you look over to the right of the screen, you can see that we're at a level 150, and that's where I'm going to be trying to keep all of these builds, is right at level 150. Like I said, it's obviously not a low-level build, but I find 150 is very attainable for a regular play style, and just being careful to upgrade yourself whenever you've got the, applicable runes. So that's where we're going to be trying to keep all these builds, is right around there. And for this one, you're obviously going to want to prioritize certain skills over others, and the best thing you can do is to go for the soft caps on them, because that's when you're going to start seeing diminishing returns in how effective it is to upgrade them. And so the main skills you want to focus for this build are going to be dexterity and endurance, and then your secondary skills are going to be vigor and strength. And you're obviously also going to need a couple other things just as a bare minimum. So for example, Arcane of 10 and Faith of 15 just to use the Bloodblade spell and the Sacred Finger Seal. That's why you need 10 Arcane for the Finger Seal and 15 Faith for the Bloodblade incantation. Strength can be pretty useful on this. You can see I've only got it up to level 20 because it's not the most important because of the weapon types we're using, but the higher that is, the better damage you're going to get on certain weapons. But the caps that are best to go for, so obviously if you're going over 150, it would be excellent if you could get your dexterity up to 80, your endurance up to 60, your vigor up to 60, and your strength up to 55. But for the purposes of this, you can see that at level 150, I've got my vigor at 44, mind at 15, endurance at 50, strength at 20, dexterity at 60, intelligence at 15, faith at 15, and arcane at 10. So I'm not at any of the best areas, like the best range to go for the soft caps, but the minimum ones I put on this one are 55 for dexterity, 50 for endurance, 40 for vigor, and 20 for strength. And so you can see that's kind of where we're at. So as far as stats go, like I said, you just want to make sure you're prioritizing the right ones to make this build as effective as possible. All right, and so we're up here by the Weeping or the Forlorn Hound, I should say, the Forlorn Hound Evergall, and we're going to test this one out. So, just a little heads up for kind of how this build works. You have to start off in one-handed mode so you can actually activate your incantation, and then switch back into two-handed mode for maximum effect. And the reason I brought two Twin Blades is just to show you. So on the stock Twin Blade, I kept the standard spinning slash attack, whereas on the other one, I went with the spinning weapon attack. which can be great against large stationary opponents, or at least opponents that don't move very quick and don't attack very quickly, because you can obviously deal an immense amount of damage with that very, very quickly. But for a lot of your, I guess, more middling enemies or enemies that move around a lot more, you're going to want the more mobile, quicker to engage attack that the standard Twin Blade has already. So yeah, that's basically all there is to know about combat with this build. It's going to be a mobile build that you're going to have to get used to dodging with against a lot of enemy types. It'll have effectiveness at different points in the game, but it is pretty powerful and pretty easy to get to this point. So we're going to activate our incantation, and then we're going to go two-handed, and we're just going to go in for the kill. Well, I don't know about kill so much, but so you can see how much damage we're doing. Now, certain enemies aren't going to be as effective by this build just because of the fact that a lot of the damage done on this build comes from both the fire and the bleed damage types, and not all enemies are susceptible to them. Oops, didn't see him there. Alright, so you can see it's a pretty dang effective build, deals very high damage. There we got the Bloodhound's Fang, a lot of people's favorite curved greatsword. That's all for the first build, so let's move on to the second one. Alright, and so for our second build, we of course have the famous Tank Goat build, and the idea of this one is to be as impervious to physical damage as possible. And so this build is probably the most broken one on here, at least for fighting bosses in the game. It's not the best against multiple enemies because it does make you a little bit slower, and if they get behind you, they can still damage you. But from frontal assaults with this build, it's basically impossible to take any damage. Not to mention you look pretty cool. So you can see that we're going for a very heavy build on this one. As far as equipment on this build goes, you're going to want a thrusting weapon, and so I like to use the heavy thrusting sword, the Bloody Hellas. The reason I like this is because it's got a really, really high damage. It causes a blood loss buildup. It's got the Dynast's Finesse special attack, which can be pretty useful in certain situations, so it's pretty effective. But any thrusting weapon actually will work quite well with this build, so you could use a light thrusting sword, spear, or any of the heavy spears. Basically anything that is a standard thrusting weapon is going to work really good with this build because that's the only type of attack you want to do because you want to be able to maintain your block. Then for the shield. Okay, so the Fingerprint Stone Shield is the one that makes this build perfect, especially once you've leveled it up to plus 25 like I have here. The reason it makes it so perfect is because this shield paired with this talisman allows you to never ever drain your stamina while you're blocking, so it makes you totally impervious to damage. You just got to keep that block up, and it doesn't matter how the enemy hits you, you're not going to take any damage, at least not from a frontal assault. Now obviously this shield is kind of a pain to get. I'm not going to show you how to do that today because it's quite a long process, but there are videos on YouTube for how to find it. So there are several other heavy tower shields that work almost as well as this one, so you won't get the same effect where you never take any damage, but with lesser shields, or with this one not leveled all the way up, you can take a tremendous amount of damage without ever actually getting damage, so you can block the damage, I should say. It works with other shields. They have to be great shields, and the better one you use, the better you're off, but this one leveled up to plus 25 is definitely the way to go to make yourself invincible. As for armor, again, any super heavy armor is going to be great. The reason why the Bull Goat armor is so much better is because A, it has some of the best damage negation stats in the game, and B, it has by far the highest poise. And poise is basically what helps you not crumble under attacks. So having a high poise suit of armor is very important. So that's why I go with the Bull Goat set. As for talismans, I've already said the Great Shield Talisman is essential for this one. Other than that, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman is just going to be another one that boosts your physical damage negation, so you're going to take a lot less physical damage when you're using this one. The Bull Goat's Talisman raises your poise, so you can see that my poise is much higher than the standard 100. This is most of the reason why. And then the Crimson Amber Medallion plus 2 just gives you a lot more HP. As far as gear goes, this is basically the perfect setup. There are a couple other options for, like I said, the shield that work almost as well, and any thrusting weapon will work perfectly fine for your weapon. As far as stats, if you look over to the right of the screen, again, we're going to be right at level 150. Here, we're going to be prioritizing strength, endurance, and vigor. Now, vigor is obviously just going to raise your HP and make it so you can take a lot more damage. So no matter what build you're doing, the higher your vigor is, the better the build's going to be. Here, we have it at 60. Mind is not important for this build, so we're not putting any extra points into mind. Endurance is important, so we're going to have that at 50. Obviously, it would be better if we could have that at 60, because that's the, like, peak soft cap where you kind of see the most value up until level 60. And then for strength, we're at 55. It would be much better at 80, but at 55, this build will work perfectly fine. And then I've got my arcane up to 17 and dexterity up to 19 just so I can use the Bloody Hellas. There are other thrusting weapons that don't have requirements in, or don't have as high of requirements as this one, and would work pretty dang well. And so I could see the argument for using a weapon like the standard Great Epee or something like that, which is going to have slightly less damage and doesn't have that bleed effect, but you can use it at a much lower level, so you could use those extra points in strength and vigor to make yourself even more robust. So there's definitely different ways to make this build, but this is the way that I find it working the best. So we're here at the Lord Contender's Evergal, and we're going to test out this build against a decently powerful boss. We'll get ourselves down to our Flask of Crimson Tears just to be sure, and we'll go into our blocking stance. This might not be the best example just because we're going up against a pretty standard size enemy. But you can see that we're not draining any of our stamina, we're not taking any damage. You can see that we take a little bit of damage from his lightning attacks, but we definitely are not losing our stamina from them. And we can just safely stab him from behind our shield. And another beauty is you just wait until they hit your shield and then you get that slight damage and speed boost from your next thrusting attack. So like I've said, this one's a pretty idiot-proof build, and you can tell that it definitely makes boss fights that may have... Now, mind you, this isn't a particularly difficult boss fight on its own, but I just wanted to show against an enemy that can deal significant damage and can take significant damage. It makes it so you don't have to do a lot of dodging, jumping around, dashing. It's, like I said, it's a pretty good... pretty good build. All right, and so for our third build, we have the Bloody Assassin build. And now there's a couple different ways to do this one, and I'll just show you a couple not really variations, but different aspects. But basically, this one is going to be a bleeding dex build focused around a dual dagger thing setup. So we're going to want to go for high speed slashing attacks, which is great because, you know, dual wielding daggers is great for that. And there's basically two schools of thought as far as gear in this one go. So the way that I like to set up this build just personally is with a plus 25 Misericordia in the main hand, and I like to upgrade that with the Bloodhound Step and Blood ability, so we're going to get that causing a blood loss buildup of 93, we get that extra crit score of 140 because of the Misericordia, and we also get the Bloodhound Step main effect, and then I like to offhand my Reduvia. So that one is the way that I really like to set this up. You could also dual wield it with the Reduvia, so you could just do two Reduvias, which is great for a lot of things. It works excellently, but I think it works a lot better this way because the Misericordia has that extra high crit, so any one-hit attacks or any time where you're going for those crit attacks behind, you're going to deal quite a bit higher damage there, and you can upgrade it using the Bloodhound Step, so you can make this build have that ability, which is great in that fast-moving, close-paced combat that this build is going to be based on. Then for our armor, I like to go with the Black Knife set. So the reason I like to do this is because it stays very light, so you have the light load when you go with this, but it still gives you actually pretty high damage negation for a lot of different things, and it gives you a poise of 29, which is pretty high for light armor. As far as talismans on this one, I like to pair the Assassin's Crimson Dagger, so critical hits restore hit points, and you're going to do a lot of crits with a build like this, so that's useful. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation, which just has the effect that it gives you higher attack power when there's blood loss in the vicinity, and since you're doing a blood build, there's always going to be blood loss in the vicinity, so you get a boost to your attack power all the time, which is nice. Then we have Crepus's Vial, which eliminates all sound made by the wearer during movement. And now some people would argue that you don't need this if you're using the Black Knife set because it does kind of negate its effect because the Black Knife set has that built in. I like to have it anyway, just in case I use a different armor set or something like that, so that's why I'm showing it here. If you are using the Black Knife, then using the Crimson Talisman or something that's going to give you higher hit points or something else like that, or maybe a specific weapon one for your daggers or something for extra blood loss or something like that is going to probably be more useful to you. But if you don't have the Black Knife set, then the Crepus's Vial makes you just as silent, so you can sneak up on people very, very easily. And then the Concealing Veil, so that conceals the wearer while crouching away from foes. If you look over to the right, you can see once again we're at level 150, and on this one, you're going to want to prioritize your two main skills are going to be Dexterity and Endurance, because they're going to allow you to get those quick follow-up attacks really fast and swing a lot. So that's why they're going to be super important, not to mention move as quickly as possible. Vigor is going to be your next most important one, just because you obviously need hit points, otherwise you're going to die way too quickly, and this is a build that's a glass cannon, so you can inflict a ton of damage very quickly, but you will die if you take a bunch of damage. So on the next level, our most important is going to be our arcane, because that's going to help with specific types of weapons that scale with arcane because of bleeding. And a good example of one of those is going to be the Reduvia, which has a B rating for arcane scaling, so it's very important on there. So your arcane is going to be pretty important for this build as well. You can see I've got it at 50 for vigor, 50 for endurance, 55 for dexterity, and 32 for arcane. The best case scenario, if you were a higher level than this, would be dexterity of 80, endurance of 60, arcane of 80, and a vigor of at least 60. That would be like best case scenario, but that's considerably higher than this. So that is skills and equipment. So you can see we're over here on the Weeping Peninsula. We're going to move on over to the Evergaol, and we're going to test this out in a boss fight. Alright, so with a build like this, you're going to want to make sure you're using your dual wielding attack because it's going to give you highest FPS, but you're going to want to stay nice and mobile because you cannot take a lot of damage in a build like this. So you can see right there, we were definitely able to inflict first blood. And we're going to use that Bloodhound step to avoid taking as much damage as possible. So that was obviously a pretty quick fight. Oh man, I love that. So like I said, glass cannon build. The best way to use something like this is to not get hit, and to make sure that you're always the one who draws first blood. Alright, and so for our final build today, it's going to be a magic one. So I know not everybody likes those, but they are very overpowered if you do them right, and this one is pretty right. So I call this one the Glintstone Archmage build, and it's going to be basically focused on one thing, but it can be used for a lot of things. So what we're going here for is obviously something that works rather well as a mage, but also doesn't just die the moment anyone touches it, which is what happens when you use a lot of the plain matching mage suits. So you can see that we're actually using quite a bit of armor here. So as far as equipment on this one goes, we're going to use the Carrion Regal Scepter in our main hand and the Meteorite Staff in our offhand. And so a 2-staff attack is one of the best ways to go in this game for magic. I mean, you can also do what I like to do a lot of times and pair either a dagger or a katana or a short sword or something like that in your offhand, so you have a melee option up close. But that really only becomes more of an option if you're going to diversify into a spellblade type build, and you don't get quite as powerful in sorcery if you're sacrificing skills for strength, for example. So that's why I have it like this. The Meteorite Staff just gives you a great boost to gravity type sorcery, and there are some really, really powerful gravity spells, so that's why I like this one. As far as the Carrion Regal Scepter goes, it's one of the absolute best weapons in the game, and it scales, it's in the S tier for intelligence, so it scales very well with intelligence. Other options that work pretty well are the Azure Glintstone Staff or Lusat Staff. They're very powerful. They have downsides though, and that's why the Carrion Regal Scepter is the better way to go. As far as the armor we're wearing, we're trying to maximize our protection while keeping us in the medium load range. So we have Azure's Glintstone Crown, and we have that because of the boosts for specific spells, so that's why I went with this one, and that's just a key thing with most mage outfits in this game. Most of the biggest benefits you get from them come from the headwear, so that's the most important part to keep. So that's why we have Azure's Glintstone Crown. Also, it looks pretty cool. Then we have the Carrion Knight Armor, which is one of the best in the medium range for actually offering different types of damage negation, and has decent poise and everything. So that's why I went with this one. And then the Scaled Gauntlets and Scaled Greaves are again, they're going to fall under that same sort of category. They offer probably the best in-class protection for arms and legs without getting too ridiculously heavy. As far as our talismans, we're going to start with the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, because even though we have decent protection with our armor, we're still going to obviously need as much help as we can get because it's a mage build. So this is going to help us with that physical damage negation. The Radagon Icon shortens spellcasting time, so that's pretty essential for any mage build. The Graven Mask Talisman greatly raises the potency of sorcery, so this is going to make your spells much more powerful, so that's very important. And then the Old Lord's Talisman extends spell effect duration, so any spells that you're casting that have some sort of an effect that isn't just an initial blast, this is going to make them longer, dealing more damage. Not everyone likes the Old Lord's Talisman. I do. I like it quite a bit. So if you look over to the right of the screen, we're again at level 150, and on this one we're going to prioritize intelligence and mind the most, and then vigor the next most, and then after that endurance and dexterity if you can. So you can see that we've put quite a bit of points into mind and intelligence, keeping them both up at 60. Vigor is at 45. I'd rather have it at 50 or 60, but we just don't have all the levels that we can for that. And then we've put a couple points into endurance, bringing that up to 20. So dexterity is at 14, which isn't the best. I'd rather have it be a little higher than that, but that's all we have. Strength's at 14 because on this build I actually started off as, I want to say, a knight in this playthrough, and then transformed it into a mage, so I didn't start off with the best starting stuff. Obviously, it would be best to start off as an astrologer if you plan to be a mage, or if you plan to do this build. That's what we've got for it. You can see we're in the medium load. Our poise is 36, so that's actually not bad at all. As far as spells I recommend with this this build, really it's centered around just one spell, which is the Comet Azure spell. Very, very effective in this build, and I'll show you why after I go through the rest of these spells. But other than that, some of the other best spells you can currently use in the game are going to be the Stars of Ruin, Loretta's Great Bow, the Glintstone Comet Shard, the Meteorite of Astal, and that's one of the reasons we have our Meteorite Staff in our offhand, because it's an extremely powerful attack against boss-type enemies, because it can deal just incredible amounts of damage. And then our Great Glintstone Shard, which is pretty effective, and I'd say considerably better than just spamming the Glintstone Pebble, which I know a lot of people like to do. Like I said, it's mostly about the Comet Azure, but the rest of those spells are the other ones that I definitely recommend the most for mage combat in the game. Lastly, we're going to want to focus on our wondrous phisick, and basically the internet all seems to agree that for mages, this is going to be your best combination, and based on the testing I've done, I would say I agree. And so we're going to want to have the Magic Shrouding Cracked tier, which temporarily boosts magic attacks in mixed phisick. Pretty useful there. It's going to give us a boost to the damage that we deal with our spells. And then this one, which is definitely the most important, which is the Cerulean Hidden tier, which eliminates all FP consumption in mixed phisick. So for the duration of your phisick after you've taken it, you use absolutely no magic. And since the Comet Azure is a sustained blast magic attack, you can see how that would be very, very useful. Basically, until your phisick runs out, you can just keep holding that, and it's going to keep doing insane amounts of damage until your physick's done, and then it'll start draining your magic. Typically speaking, most bosses in the game, you can kill them before your flask of physick runs out, and if not, you'll at least get them really low. So let's go test out this build against some larger enemies so I can show you what I mean. Alright, so we're in the Evergall, we're going to pop our wondrous physick, and then we're going to do this. Obviously, the more distance you have on them, unless you're out of range, the better it's going to be for something like this. But as you can see, pretty dang effectual. And now, obviously, we ran out of our physick there at the end, but you can see what I'm talking about. Incredible damage. Basically takes all of the skill out of being a mage. So here we are at another one, the Malefactor's Evergall. We're going to pop our physick. And then we're going to blast this guy. Whoops. I probably should have released that earlier, huh? So he was able to get some damage on us, but it didn't help him that much. So like I said, builds like this, some people may not really like them. They might think they're cheating or something like that. But if you want to be a super powerful mage, that's the way you do it. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.